All right, welcome y'all. Kind of wait for a little bit, let people trickle in here as we're coming. As you are trickling in, all right, want you to say where you're from, kind of let us know where you're coming in from in the chat. Always fun to see where the furthest place from here is. So, let's hear it. Um, we're gonna get going now, all right? So today's guest, Hunter Schurrer, is the vice president of performance at the University of Health and Performance, where he leads an interdisciplinary team focused. Um, Sorry, excuse me, losing my place here. Where he leads an interdisciplinary team focused on developing better humans through movement, leadership, and purpose. With over 20 years of coaching experience spanning collegiate athletics and special operations, Hunter's career has been built from the soft truth that humans are more important than hardware. For over a decade, he served as a human performance specialist with 1st Special Forces Group, helping shape the foundation of the Army Special Forces Performance Program. Before that, he coached at the University of Wyoming and the University of Virginia, where he also earned his master's in exercise physiology. Hunter, welcome to the show, man.
Awesome, Coop. I appreciate you having me, man. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. So, a big part of like how I like to start the episodes is really diving into, a deep, kind of personal story here. And you presented to SOFCOM, the military branch of NATO, about training special operators at their headquarters in Belgium. What happened in your life that, really molded you into, being the man that's ready for a moment like that? That's not something every coach gets to do.
Yeah, it's one was very, very fortunate to be able to do that from the standpoint of I think it comes down to kind of knowing some of the right people, but also there's a lot that goes into being able to, I think, know the right people in the first place, put yourself in the rooms that then like one step leads to the next, that leads to the next. And so knowing some of the people that were over there and what they were doing was they put on a lessons learned conference. And I want to say there was 23 of the nations that are involved with NATO. So SOFCOM is, to your point, it's a special operations branch. And it was people coming in, basically sharing a lot about what's going on, whether it was in Ukraine, whether it's going on within human performance, and was brought in to very much share like what worked. And when I was at first group, how did it work? Why were we so successful? And at the time, measuring kind of success from like utilization. In other words, it was a volunteer program. These are big boys, big girls in regards to they know their roles and their jobs and their duties better than I ever could of somebody who never served coming from the civilian side, even though being a quote unquote SME subject matter expert as they frame it in the military. But why did we have the success? Why were we able to get as many people from a percentage, a number standpoint to buy in, to trust what we were doing? And so I got to share like some of those things that worked, how we were able to continue to build. We had an amazing team for one, to name drop, whether it was Nate Palin, Rob Hartman, a number of people that we were really peaking and rolling, but it just came down to those relationships. And so then to go into SOFCOM, present on the fact from a civilian, here's how you need to be able to build the relationships and how trust. Well, it always seems like, yes, everybody knows that you need to build trust. And I'm sure people are probably just tired of hearing that to some extent. I know I do, but like you can't overstate how important that is for those individuals that are putting themselves in harm's way to trust you, to offload their training to you, to make sure that you're going to take care of them in the best way possible.
I love that. Yeah, and I guess like what were some of the mechanisms that you found worked really well to build trust in that community?
Openly admitting that I have never been where you have been. I will probably never be where you are going, and that you are still the expert on your job. So being like, listen, you've been downrange, you've been deployed, you've been in combat, you've like point blank, you've been shot at. I have not. And so what, like, let's talk about your last deployment. Let's talk about like, what is the mission set? Where are you going? What is going on? So there's one, it's gathering a ton of information without trying to push anything. I think the biggest thing is making sure that all you're trying to do is they're going to want to know that you are not trying to be anything that you're not. And then two, going out and getting your hands dirty, whether that is going out and spending time at the range, going out like, okay, you guys are going rucking, or you guys are going, there's a place called Solo Point at JBLM where a lot of group guys would go and run. Okay, I'm not a great runner. I'm not going to try to pretend to be, but I need to go experience what they're doing as a culture, as a group, as an organization, anytime there's an invite, like, yes, of course I want to go up in a Chinook. Let's go up in the bird. That'd be fun. But like, how do you understand? And like, I want to literally go, like, what's a day in the life like? What is it like when you're in the team room all day? What is it like when you're like your schedule, your world that you are living and you're operating in, first and foremost? And I think if you only are seen as that coach in the weight room, then I think you're going to miss the mark, massively.
Mm-hmm.
And even always lessons learned to like look back on that. And I think would even double down. Like if I brought on a new coach, like I don't even know if I'd let them start training somebody until they're like, yeah, you're going to spend your first X months, X weeks, whatever that is, this much a day doing nothing but embedding yourself within the unit just to understand who these men and women are as individuals, their job sets, and all that it is.
Roger that. Yeah, no, that's I mean, that's fascinating stuff, right? And kind of, I'm really curious to dive into a little bit because I think this is such an important frame of mind to be in when we actually think about training operators, right? Is like what is different and unique about that community itself. Obviously you're talking about going and kind of going through the physical suck of some of their day-to-day training and day-to-day reality with them. But what are those like actual live in the team room elements like that are different from, training your Gen Pop, training your pro sports teams?
The cultural piece. You didn't like we get to see behind the basically the curtain. I didn't go through selection, whether, if you're dealing with GBs, you're dealing with the Q course, you're doing with the SFAS. I didn't go through any of that. I didn't earn that right. So I think coming from the athletic side of it, there's a lot of us that were to some extent athletes. Even if we didn't play football in college or at the level that the people that we're familiar with the game. So in other words, do you know what somebody's MOS is? Do you know what do you know what MOS stands for? So in other words, if you don't understand like what their job is, you have to embed yourself within that. So then it's understanding that like, well, you think maybe their job is super exciting. Maybe it's literally like this is all they're sitting all day. Maybe this is their tempo, or understanding that they're coming home and they're going to a million different schools and being pulled a million different directions, or building that, the relationship from the side of the house as far as like, man, why are you late today? You're late every day for training. Yeah, because I don't get to see my kid when I'm deployed and I'm going to drive them to school. And if you got an issue with me being 5 minutes late, let's have a conversation. And it's like, got it. You can be 5 minutes, but understanding, and it has to go to the individual level.
Yeah.
So there's that element in regards to, yes, these are extremely high performers, but then understanding it's not necessarily that they're the high performers from a physicality standpoint. It's not that they're not. But what really matters is what are their skill sets? What is their experience? In other words, how do we keep guys that have been in the fight, that have been downrange, that still want to, that are still on a team to be as lethal, so to speak, as possible, to where the physical piece isn't the reason why they can't do their job. And a lot of the time, it's just understanding what are their limitations. They've gone through these selections and sometimes they were so successful in spite of their training. But they think because they got through selection, their training worked. But when you look at it on paper, like, brother, you are just more mentally resilient, that your training didn't actually do a great job. You just said, I'm not going to quit and I'm just going to take one more step, one more day. I'll quit the day after that, but today I don't. And
Mm.
so just understanding that cultural piece around like, how do you support them? And then it's getting into, okay, what do you need to do? Talk to me about what it's like to be deployed. What is it like to be downrange? What is your tempo like? What is your, where are you going? So it is a lot of conversations. And then it's peeling the onion because you look at an ODA and now you've got 12 guys on a team. Well, 12 of those guys might describe physically whatever incident or whatever happened was like. Somebody's like, dude, it was easy, no issue with that. The other's guy like, dude, I couldn't do X, Y, and Z. And so how do we make sure, because it is very subjective. So like, how do you have those conversations and put yourself in a position to where they hear and then they're willing to actually share those with you?
Fascinating. And so obviously there's different teams, right? There's a dive team, there's a Halo team, there's, maybe an air assault team or something.
Yep.
And with those kinds of demands, right? And they all have different missions, different roles. Like, how does that kind of start to creep into the training itself? From I'm talking like a super
Yep.
ground level nuts and bolts, element with that. Because if you have the culture piece where it sounds like, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that you have to understand that the stress that these guys are going through needs to be worked with on a human level, on an individual level, like you're
Absolutely.
saying. And with that then, but there's still at the end of the day that like this is how things need to be done in order for you to improve. So
Yep.
let's unpack that a little bit if you have any thing to share there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you are, I mean, as much as you want to know them from the individual standpoint and make sure that you are being empathetic. And I think people misunderstand empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy doesn't mean that you're going to be weak. Empathy means that I am going to understand what you are going through and I'm going to hold you accountable to that. Because even if you're tired, you still have to be able to execute to this degree. And so when we start looking at what we were doing training wise, yes, you have all these different teams to your point. You've got a dive team, a halo team, a boat team, a mountain team. However, opposed to just doing like completely different schedules, I think you can probably bake out something along the lines of like 70, 80% in regards to what are the physical characteristics that all of these individuals need. Well, when we, whether it's movement patterns and we can break down, yes, everybody needs to push, pull, squat, hinge, carry, and move. Cool. To what degree? Where are they going? Awesome. What does our energy system development look like from a conditioning standpoint? Cool. Like all those are your foundational pieces. And then we need to look at like, okay, from a team level, if we're doing assessments and wanting to know where they're at, what are their weaknesses? Always addressing that, bringing those up. Yes, we need to magnify the strengths, but what are the weaknesses that we see across the team? Because we can say, yes, they're a halo team, but we also know that a dive team within the cultural aspect is usually just traditionally more fit. It's a badge of honor in which a lot of those guys like, I'm a combat diver, and this is what that means, and our fitness is going to be at a higher level. True or not, but that's what they're going to hold themselves to. But understanding like what do they need to be able to do, what are their weaknesses, and then baking out almost to an individual level because you do have 12 guys on a team. And with their schedules and all that it is, they are going to be to some extent at the mercy of what their team sergeant or team leader wants to do. So if
Mm-hmm.
you've got a
Very
team,
true.
because it is a volunteer service, so to speak, to come in and utilize us, and it should be, in my opinion. I'm not the one going down range. Yes, I might be the expert, but if you have a better way of doing things, let's at least have a conversation, but it's up to you. However, if you've got a team sergeant who likes CrossFit, that team's probably doing CrossFit. If they like to run, they're probably running. If they like to bodybuild, that. If the team sergeant doesn't care about their fitness and does it on their own. So what you're kind of doing is like herding cats while also making sure that they are empowered. So there's a huge educational piece to helping them understand, because if they are downrange for 9 months, how do we make sure that they understand the education that comes with that? Well, also then being able to work around their schedule. In other words, if they come in as a team, they're going to obviously want to train as a team. However, you might get guys that come in 1 day a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. And so now that guy who's training 5 days a week is training next to the guy who's training one, in opposed to just saying random stuff or we're just doing quote unquote workouts. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with workouts to some degree. To take a little bit from Dave Tate, there's 4 levels. There's, because it's a family podcast, we'll say there's poop, there's sucks, there's good, and there's great.
Yep.
And if we're working with people to go from that quote unquote poop to sucks, they're going to respond to anything. Let's just get them moving on a regular basis. And for some guys or gals, great. But if we're going from sucks to good, what is that going to look like? Good to great. And it's not that their physical capabilities, a lot of them weren't great. However, a lot of them would respond just to better general training. But it was also helping offload, to your point about the higher stress environments. How do we help deregulate a little bit of that? So it's just this constant, one, gathering of the information, and two, our training schedule that we build has to be very flexible to where if a guy's coming 1 day a week, 3 days or 5 or anything in between, it can meet his needs, allows him to train together as a team from the community aspect. And so that created as many problems in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
because I think the growth, if a coach is willing to like lean into it, because there was a lot of people that, said their schedules are too much. Let's just do workouts. And they come in and they do the workout and it's better than nothing. It is better than nothing. And I don't knock that because I wasn't at those units. I didn't get to see their schedule and it would be, incorrect for me to do so.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you're willing to, I think, lean into it a little bit and see what the schedules are, you can find a way to skin that cat to make sure that everybody can train together, everybody can can adapt. And yeah, some cool lessons came out of it.
I dig that. I actually think it's very similar the working actually at the units to almost working with the high school kids to an extent, who where it is all volunteer on the team and it is like, like they're stressed out going to classes and doing these various different things. Now, that herding cats element, though, I think an important thing to really examine is how you're, let's say you've got a guy that likes one guy's doing more bodybuilding stuff, one guy's doing more CrossFit stuff, and they're all doing, field stuff, kind of
Yep.
in the mix there. Like, let's just use those two as an example, the CrossFit versus the bodybuilding. How does that change the workout that you do with them when they come to see you to train?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, are they coming to see us to train? In other words, let's say they're coming in the building and we're seeing that, Billy over there is doing his bodybuilding thing and he's on this team and maybe the rest of the team's training with us. Maybe they're not, but I mean, first start with the relationship. How do I go over and just make him aware that I exist? How do I make sure that I care about him and want to make sure that he's taken care of, to just understand like, hey, what are you doing today for training? What's going on? Very cool. If you have any questions, and it's just starting to like drip in like conversations to make sure that he knows that I'm not trying to tell him how to do his job, that I'm a resource. But let's say at this point, people have come in, now we've got a CrossFitter, we've got a bodybuilder, we've probably done some sort of assessments. And even like within the assessments, hopefully that's probably taken place within training, because a
Mhm.
lot of time with their schedules, as cool as it can be to have full-on assessment days or weeks, it doesn't work as great, I think, within the community from a standpoint of they only have so much time. And if they've only got a limited amount of sessions per week, only a limited amount of weeks that they can train, it's not that we can't get good numbers from assessments, but if we spend or burn, so to speak, an entire day of just doing assessments, I think we missed out on another day to train. So I think that there's
Mhm.
ways you can obviously work in your assessments into your training. So now we're trying to figure out, and then we show them through some of the data, where we at in regards to, if we're looking at, this spider graph or this radar chart, which is what we use when we're at group, super rudimentary, but it worked like a charm. Here's your aerobic fitness. Here's your aerobic fitness, your ability, upper body strength to push, to pull, your lower body strength, your movement, whatever it is. Create whatever metrics around whatever skills you think somebody needs to have. And then we can be like, dude, I'm not going to tell you not to train to bodybuild. I know you love it. Like, you like drinking your pre-workout, you like watching the things, you have like to try to, because now we're getting into who this person is like a person. At the
Right.
end of the day, they are still individuals who like the things that they like, but we can show them like, here's the deal. You're about to do X, and we can see on paper. I'm not going to tell you not to do your hypertrophy or your bodybuilding work. How do we then make sure that we start dripping in? It's literally like getting somebody at their vegetables. Dude, I'm not going to take away your dessert, but understand that we can only eat so much dessert, and these vegetables and this fiber and the other stuff that we need is going to be the bigger piece that we actually need to do and that we need to handle. And then so we're looking at it from all those different lanes. And so when we look at like the model, if we get into it, it's why I became a massive fan of concurrent periodization in our
Mhm.
regards to we're working multiple characteristics, multiple variables at a time, and we're almost always doing some sort of conditioning, some sort of energy system development. And the reason being, if I only get a guy one day a week, I want to make sure that we're probably touching at least some way, shape, or form, some major movement patterns and getting some sort of conditioning. And it also then needs to fit into that larger puzzle. Well, if he's training 5 days a week, he can still train with the other guy. And so we're using that from like the overarching model. And then,
Mhm.
handling load in regards to, I just saw that question come up in the chat. When we're
It's a
doing
good one.
that, when it's a big fan of vertical integration. And so if people are familiar, I mean, the originator is really Charlie Francis. And what he
Mhm.
saw within sprinters was they were losing physical characteristics over extended periods of time. And so if we run potentially some sort of, more traditional model of training in which, let's say, it's just something linear, and in which I move from whether it's muscular endurance hypertrophy down to strength, down to power, we know that we can only maintain some of those characteristics for so long without tapping into them. So in other words, we know that we can lose speed and power within 5 days. It's why we see sprinters sprinting on a regular basis leading into races. It's why we see weightlifters as far as still staying heavy to some extent within a week of a meet, because those physical characteristics can diminish. And so what we would then do is now each day we're probably touching some sort of power, some sort of strength, some sort of muscular endurance. But what you then do is you really let the intensity determine the result, we know we know intensity is the magic thing. How fast, how
Mhm.
heavy, whatever it may be, that's going to determine the physical characteristic that adapts or creates. And then we let the volume determine the emphasis of what is happening within the training. So even within a training block in which we're getting into speed, we're still probably going to do one set of some muscular endurance work. Let's say, okay, we're going to do a set of 20 to 40 or whatever it is, body weight lunges. It doesn't have to be a ton, but it's like, you know, the old meme of Salt Bay, like we're just going to like drop it in to make sure that we have just tapped or touched some muscular endurance to make sure that we can help at least mitigate some of the loss in that physical characteristic. And then on the flip side of that, if we're in a muscular endurance hypertrophy phase, if, you know, we're early on and, you know, if we want to get into like phases, if we're in some accumulation phase where we're getting them back into it, we still want to touch some speed or power, but it literally might be one set of these jumps, one set of this sprint, like just small little dosage to keep that tool in the box compared to like completely shifting. And there's not anything obviously wrong with other models. However, I've found like when guys are coming in, you don't always know when they're coming in. How do they fit with the team? And then how do we modify accordingly? Because I think you could make the argument that out of any of the athletes, people in the tactical world need to be able to operate in all domains. They need to be able to move well. They need to be able to sprint. They
Mhm.
need to be able to change levels. They need to then be able to potentially go for hours to a day or two on end.
Mhm.
And if we haven't touched into that on somewhat of a regular basis, I think that we're doing them an injustice.
Mhm. Yeah, I 100% agree with you, man. I mean, you're almost trying to make the GPP god, you know, like literally anything you throw at them, they're going to be at least proficient,
Yeah.
right? It's not that, you know, we're necessarily trying to make someone who's the best in the world at one of those things, right? We're trying to make them sufficient in all of those areas so that they're not, you know, like shit out of luck essentially when they're
Yeah.
downrange.
No, it's true.
Um,
And so when you go back to that bodybuilder, it's like, look, brother, I'm not going to tell you not to do hypertrophy work, but
yeah.
your ability to sprint or to move or whatever it is not good. Like you talked about, like, and we see it. People train like bodybuilders, and then they're like, I train 6 days a week, man. Why am I not fit? And then they go, you know, blow their ACL, you know, playing basketball because you
Yeah.
don't train like a basketball player. You train to like pose and stand in one place. So don't get upset, you know, with the really, like I go back to, like, don't get upset at the results you didn't get from the work you didn't do.
Hmm.
And so we need to make sure that the training that we're giving them allows them to operate all sorts of terrains. Can they move through all certain planes? Can we build that athleticism in? Is that aerobic base where it needs to be? And then let's work in the things that they like to do. So the CrossFitter still gets to CrossFit. However, if he's doing everything in what we see a lot in the CrossFit world in the sagittal plane, up, down,
Mm.
front to back, there's not as much rotation. There's not as much in the frontal plane. So how do we make sure that let's at least drip some other things in to at least touch our bases? So going back to like that radar chart, what is that weak chain in the link? And so then how do we, you know, heal and mend that chain while still allowing them to? So to the question of managing load, it comes
Mm.
down to truly, like, I would look at the number of sets. Like we're
Mm.
still going to touch some, you know, we'll touch our hypertrophy work. However, if those are sets of 12 or whatever it is, you're going to get 2 today because right now your conditioning is the factor, and we're going to push the emphasis in regards to the volume there while still doing the other things. Even the thumbs up emoji worked, so that
Yeah,
agrees. I'll
like
take it.
Zoom likes what
Yeah,
we're
Zoom
saying.
liked what we had to say.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's funny. So I guess like one question I have now off of all that is you have your deployment workup,
Yep.
right? Then you have the deployment, and then you're coming back from a deployment.
Yeah.
And so I want to think through it's almost like in season, off season, preseason through a different lens, and you know, taken to an extreme. So how do you, because you're not deploying with the guys.
Nope.
So how are you educating them to do things during deployment? What are you doing before that deployment? And then how do you help them recover from a deployment?
Well, one, I think I mean, it's a good segue to drop Bridges' name in. So, I mean, like when we were at
Yeah.
group, like it is. I'm like, we used group. I mean, excuse me, we used Bridge when we were at group when I left. And
Yep.
literally, we had guys that were downrange on the other side of the world that had access to a phone that the damn phone would ring at like, you know, 5:45 because they knew that I just walked into the office. And now I'm having a conversation. He's like, hey man, today when I'm like, dude, good on you. But it is having the conversation. One, like you're going to hear me go back to the human element. Some people, depending on where they were at training, a lot of guys, depending on how active they were on a deployment, we had some guys that were training almost twice a day because there wasn't much going on. There were other guys that
Yeah.
didn't even really get to change because their op tempo was just bananas. And so, one, understanding where they're at. Two, then we need to understand what they were doing. So, if I'm looking at somebody who's coming back from being down range and they've been in kit, well, what does that look like from a mobility standpoint? Well, they've probably been in boots a little more, so we know ankle mobility is going to be a thing. If they haven't been training, I mean, we could literally go through a mobile joint. So, what does their hips look like? But also, if they're in kit, what does it look like from their thoracic rotation? And so, or
Yeah.
their flexion or their extent, whatever that may be. And so then we're looking at what are the problem areas that we see. And so if we're coming back into this accumulation phase, or if we're coming back into this GPP, which you can kind of probably interchange both out,
Mhm.
like, are we dripping more of that in? Or is some of our training, like to that point, like really general, like movement to where we don't even need to get into the extremes of that? And so we would train groups on a regular basis that anybody could come in for. Or if we would get down to the team level. And so if a team wanted to come in, then we could do some sort of reassessment. But then we also need to be careful from the assessment standpoint that we're not setting them up for failure. If they haven't been doing anything that's been really like creating significant amounts of force, then we're not going to put them, potentially on a force plate. We're going to see what they can deadlift or pull or whatever it is. Same thing from any change of direction. So one, always make sure that we're meeting people where they're at and we're
Mhm.
not assessing them on a skill that they haven't been doing and the increase of injury goes up. But then it's how do we drip in like, okay, you've been doing all of these things. What are the capabilities that we need to work in? And it usually doesn't have to be drastic. A little bit of work goes a really long way. So it might just be a couple more of these movement mobility stuff. It might be like, okay, let's build up an additional 2 weeks with this individual team before we go like back into a full-on different type of training cycle. So it really comes down to where they're at, what they were doing, and if you don't ask, if we start to make assumptions that like, oh my gosh, you were just downrange and this other team just got back, but if they were on the other side of the country in Afghanistan or whatever it is, they could have saw it and had a completely different experience. So we need to then understand where are they at and also then understand they've been away from family. Also
Mhm.
understand the stress that is coming away from that. And are we adding more stress to a stressed out individual? And it doesn't mean like that, but we can't just sit around then and to some extent just kumbaya. We
Right.
have to train. Not there's anything wrong with that. So I love kumbaya. However, but like we have to make sure that we're building the resilience for them effectively, but understanding where they're at. And here's all the stressors that they're dealing with. And that has to be coming through because they're also not going to want to willfully open and share those things because nobody wants to be viewed as the weak link on the team. And so if they do, they don't want to lose their team spot. They don't want their teammates to believe that they're not capable. And so there's a lot of these conversations that you need to make sure that you're not putting somebody on blast. But tying back into the training, if you can't get to that level of having those conversations, they're going to be like, yeah, of course I can do it. I'll show you I can do it. And they will break themselves in the process. So their other teammate doesn't believe that they're the reason why they pulled out.
So it's such a dynamic. There's so many
Yeah.
factors that you're balancing, right? It's really interesting. And one concept I think you keep coming back to it is the training residuals piece, right? And kind of, hey, how long is this adaptation going to last? What is
Yep.
our window before we start to experience entropy here? So that diminishing returns point. So you know, if we can get very nuts and bolts with it, like I'm curious your perspective and what you've seen from the data around special operators is how frequently would we need to, and I'll break it down into simple buckets here. How often would we need to hit power to make sure that we're not leaking? How often would we need to hit, I guess let's put hypertrophy in the middle there, or just strength training in general to kind of
Yep.
keep that base. And then let's go into, some of that like metabolic conditioning. And I'll even put another layer below that of like the aerobic base that kind of supports that broader pyramid there. How do you think about that, and what's the data say from your experience there?
No, that's great, man. And it was one of the other guys. He's a civilian. He's over in Finland, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head. And I'm but I'm going to reference him. But what they showed through cold weather training when they were doing
Yeah.
with the Finnish Special Operations Forces, and it's backed up with the other research. What they saw first was there was a loss in the med ball toss, there was a loss in the broad jump that was the most significant and the
Mm.
fastest, and there was a loss in their deadlift strength. And so what we've seen, and the research shows it, we see that speed and that power component once every 5 days. So if we're
Has
not
to. Yep.
touching that within 5 days, those traits can be lost. Well, then you look at a military population, it's like, when was the last time you sprinted? And they're like 1994. But they're like, all I've been
Yeah.
asked to do is run 2 miles, and that is all I've ever been assessed on. And so now it's like, now we need to get this individual, not doesn't mean they can't sprint, but now we need to start to get them sprinting on a regular basis and moving. So when you talk about stressors that are needed and you start looking at volumes that are needed, like, yeah, we are going to go through a very thorough warm up, a lot of movement, a lot of technique when it comes to some of that stuff. So we work on, it's what we reference as like our 3Ps, our position, our pattern, and then we add the power to it. But how do we make sure those are set? And then we can turn you loose. So yeah, we're going to do all this warm up and you're going to get 1, maybe 2 reps today. But we need to touch that on a frequent basis. And so that's why, like using a concurrent model, we are going to do something explosive every single day. Because what
Mm-hmm.
happens is if I only get one person once a week and we do not do that, the chances of them like losing, let alone mitigating loss, is really high. And so speed and power, and then strength is going to be the one below it. In strength, you have a little more wiggle room on. I mean, very rarely these guys being asked to demonstrate true 1 rep strength. So we can kind of fluctuate between that, 3s to 10s, whatever it may be, but getting them to strain, getting them to work, so to speak, you can see is basically every like 2 weeks. And
Mm-hmm.
then on the big picture, true maximal strength, like at the level that they're at, if we're going back to like shit sucks good, great, they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the biggest things that we saw was within the special operations population. Not that there's not
Mm.
outliers, but these are not significantly strong individuals. These are more
No.
aerobically based guys that will
Totally.
go until they can't. Then they can tap into things that, like, if there was one takeaway that I would take back to the athletic world, is learn what goes on between the ears of somebody in the special operations community. Their ability to tap into physical characteristics that they do not own, like a true athlete does, is insane. So they do more
Yeah.
with less. And so, point being, but like we need to then like we can hold their levels of strength for give or take 2, maybe 3 weeks by just like touching it once. Their aerobic base, we see that can stretch up to like 4 weeks, almost 30 days. But understand,
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking about an elite marathon or elite cyclist. We're talking about the capabilities that they have. And so then what we can do is to that, we can kind of work it backwards from the standpoint of, well, how often do we need to touch our power? Even if we're putting power on the back burner, we need to know when somebody's consistent, cool. He is a strong, powerful guy or gal. They're going to touch it once a week or twice a week so we don't mitigate loss. Then we're going to focus on the aerobic side. Or on the flip, let's say somebody can just run and go forever, but they struggle literally picking up their body weight in a deadlift. Cool.
Yeah.
We're going to like same thing. We're going to sprinkle in that aerobic conditioning actually to build that capacity. We could actually stretch out every couple of weeks. So they might only hit a long day every 2 weeks while we build up their strength, while we build up their power. And so then we can
So
start
cool.
plugging and playing to be like, okay, we need power twice a week to mitigate those losses. We need some maximal strength, probably once every 2 weeks, depending on the individual. With their aerobic capacity, we can stretch to every 3 weeks, depending on like if
Ooh. Am I still online? I think I might have lost Hunter. I don't know if anybody else seeing that. Okay. But you are hearing me. Okay. All right. He'll be back on. They yeah, he must be on the UHP network. Yeah, funnily enough, their power went out this morning, of course, like 5 minutes before he was getting on. So they're on generators and stuff. He'll be back, I'm sure, in a minute. But guys, thanks for all the questions in the chat. This is super interesting. Appreciate you all being here. Yeah, just work with us for a minute here while we're getting back. And yeah, we'll just kind of hang tight, man. He's a good dude. Yeah. I'll see if I can answer any of these questions in the meantime. Could you do this with general pop? I have a hard time making large group classes this individualized. I would suggest looking at actually our last Unracked episode with Luca Hosevar, Paul. There are a lot of ways you can do it. It's very much like space contingent though. And so Luca Hosevar talks a lot about that in his small and large group training models. So I would suggest looking into that. Glad you guys think this is incredible. This has been a blast of an episode. Hunter knows some shit, man. It's a lot of fun. Let's see. Hunter's awesome. Does Bridge have a coaching platform to use for coaches? Yes. Shameless plug, right? Bridge is really who sponsors these Unracked episodes. It's what's used at Naval Special Warfare. Philadelphia Eagles use us, man. Like a lot of elite organizations are using us, and they do have stuff available. I have had my own private training business for years that I run Bridge off of, and so Matt, I don't know if you want to put a link to like just our basic landing page in there, but would love if you could do that. Let's see. I'm just combing for more questions. There's a lot on assessment in here, I know, which is something I'm going to ask for sure. Like, I think to summarize a lot of it, it sounds like most of you guys are keen on like, hey, what are like the actual individual um, components, like of the assessment that they're leveraging. So I'm super curious about that too. I know they use force plates. I know there's all sorts of stuff that they're doing. I have a buddy who private contractor worked with just some high level guys in the military, and they were using like functional range assessment pretty heavily. If you guys are at all familiar, like the functional range conditioning is kind of the um I don't know, the important one, to really think about there is like in terms of a recognizable name. Um yeah, that's kind of there he is. What's up, man? That
What's
Arkansas
up,
Wi-Fi. Everybody from
dude?
UHP was shitting on it. So what's up?
Dude, I don't blame them. We literally just lost power. I'm like, of course. We're back. Thank you to anybody on here. Sorry, guys.
You're good, brother. You're good. Do you remember where we left off? I don't.
Um, I mean, we're talking about just some of the flexibility in the training
Yes, that's right. We were
and
talking
coming
about kind of that
back.
training residuals concept and
Yeah,
how
thank
you would
you.
only every couple weeks lay out
Yeah.
like if you got an endurance juggernaut here, they
Yep.
don't need more of that and they don't need it every week. You can kind of space it out. So if you
Yeah.
if you
So
can keep
no,
going
that's
there.
it's good. So it's always looking at like one, what is I'm a massive fan is of minimal dosage. So when we're
Mhm.
combining that, so like how long will those characteristics last if they're not trained? So looking at the residual of that. And then two, what is the least amount of work that we can do? And the reason why, especially within this population, is they have so many other stressors that we
Mhm.
need to make sure that we're taking into play. Life, like not that everybody doesn't, but if I'm like when I was training for weightlifting, I didn't care if I was sore or couldn't walk well or beat up or whatever. Even if we're doing that at home, it affects their training. It affects going to their range. It affects that, whatever they're trying to do. And we need to make sure that, yes, we're utilizing the weight room in their training to get better for the things outside of it. So the mindset around why we're training, it has to be at the center of it all. Is this actually helping them? And then two, what's the least amount of work that we can do? Because otherwise it gives us, a little more at least leeway to allow them to handle the other stressors. So
Mhm.
if, it is not uncommon within this population to be going through everything that quote unquote war can create. And now we have to deal with the stressors of that. And I'm going to load up them into like heavy training cycles. So, like, yeah, we just put our guys through German volume training. I'm like, my man's 48 years old. He's trying to stay on a team. And you thought doing 10 sets of 10 like was the way to go. And like, I use that reference because in my head, I'm like, at what point did you figure out that 9 sets didn't work? That you needed to go to the 10th set to create adaptation? And I love training for fun and all that it is, but we need to make sure that if we're this doctor giving them dosage in medicine, like, so what's the least amount of work that we can do? What are the residuals? How long can they maintain a physical characteristic? And then we plug and play based around their schedule.
I dig that. I really dig that. Now, I do have a question kind of on some of the extreme stuff that these guys will get into, right? And
Yep,
I'll talk about like selection for the unit, right? Are you're familiar with the long walk, kind of like the
very much.
grueling? I'm sure you've trained guys for it, right? That were
Yep.
coming from your unit. So, um, talk to me about preparing someone for something like that, because it's very evident, at least in my mind, that like, look, we know that this is about survival, it's about mindset, but and you, like to an extent, you might have to kind of go train like an ultra marathon runner, and like you're about to go backpacking for the next 6 weeks because you freaking are, with like 100 pounds of shit on your back. So like, how do you kind of prep guys for those extreme things that we're talking about here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully the table stakes is you've had the conversation and you know where they're at.
Hmm.
In other words, if what we found is if individuals were training with us on a regular basis, we could prepare somebody in roughly 12 to 16 weeks. But we also knew our training and what we were doing and the
Hmm.
resiliency and the base that they had built. Otherwise, if they're just coming from quote unquote the big army, we haven't seen what they're doing. They're trying to go into these selection schools. Now all of a sudden, like we might need to train for a long time because we have to build up your capacity. It is one thing to be able to go and ruck your 12 miles at the specific pace that you need to in ideal conditions. You slept in your bed, you made sure that everything was fresh and tidy and new, and you got to have your right fueling. Now what does that look like? 2 to 3 weeks in, underslept, underfed, under stress. I'm like, cool. So the work capacity that goes into that is usually the biggest piece. And so what you end up doing, one, obviously find out where they're at, but two, we need to slowly build up their total volume of work. So, in other words, it might just be like, yes, we're starting off with this training session today. We've got our one. And in addition to, you have an additional 15-minute walk, just a walk. And then we build up to these number of training sessions. So cool, we built this capacity. Now we need to go to double days. We'll potentially even get to days in which we do 3 days, 3 a days. But they need to have the ability, not just from the physical side, but the mental side, to know that even on my worst day, I'm like, if you didn't sleep, if you're hungover, if like on your worst day, could you go out and you do that? And if the answer is not like a definitive yes, then we've fallen short. And so that's where we got into making sure that from a volume of work, understanding the skills that they needed to do, and then building up and focusing through that. Wow. Then you start working in the mental pieces, whether that's open-ended workouts. Cool. How far am I going? I will tell you after we basically break down and get through our first phase of today, because they're going to go out and they're like, how far until I have to get to this next dot on the map? Doesn't matter. Then what's next? Don't know. So point being, we need to start getting around the fact that it's easy when we know exactly what's coming in a very safe environment. Now, what does it
Hmm.
look like when we have open-ended workouts? What does it do that when we fast potentially for 12 or 18 hours prior? What does it look like when we do that early in the mornings, at nights, and heat like? So it's getting on different terrains. It's like, yes, you made your time. What does that look like when we start adding in hills and rolling hills? And so it's getting them exposed to a lot of different variables. So one, they
Yeah.
mentally know they can do it, but two, physically, we then have, the report card to be able to work that in and share that with them.
I love that. You're almost preparing them for chaos in a way, especially chaos of the mind,
Yeah,
by leaving that open-ended workout there. Really like that, because when it's a known time, a known distance, that's way different than unknown. So can you talk a little bit more about how you're kind of playing with those elements, I guess, because that is something entirely unique to special operations that I don't think exists in any other form of training I've seen.
it is, but also for what it's worth, it isn't. And what I mean by that is there's no reason to make it more complicated than it already is, because it already is now, because now it's not like I'm just mitigating one training session. So I think then you need to start looking the days at stressors in regards to, even if we keep it super basic, is this a low stress day? So in other words, is this just quote unquote zone two, cardiac output, steady state? Is there some higher nervous system work in? Is this a medium stress day in which now the volume of that work has gone up, but my intensity is still a little bit lower? Or is this a high stress day? Sprinting, heavy training, change of direction, whatever that may be. And so then what you need to do is, I mean, the easiest models I think for people out there that you can equate to life, to sport, would be to take from, somebody like Joel Jameson.
Mm.
So if anybody's familiar with like his 1, 2, 3 model, In other words, what he's talking there is out of the days of the week, if you're training 6 days, you have one super stressful day. The two is you have two medium days and you have three low stress days. And so then what you do is you kind of undulate, so to speak, the stressors. But the big piece is to make sure that a high stress day is followed by a low stress day. And so it would take a very similar model to that when building out their training sessions, opposed to it's easy to look at like when people break up splits, like this is a pull day, a bodybuilding day, an upper body day, a lower body day. Okay, what is it from the stressor? Is it a high stress day? I'm a bigger fan of stacking stress on stress. In other words, like I'm not saying you bury somebody, but I'm saying it from the standpoint of if we're going to make it an intense day, let's make it an intense day. Let's not live in this middle gray. That's not hard enough. And the research backs it. That's not hard enough or challenging enough to create adaptation, but it's also too hard to where I'm not recovering from it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if our day is going to be hard, let's make it a beast. But we're also then going to make sure that that is followed up by one or potentially two low stress days.
Mm-hmm.
While we
And
do that, like
mhm.
go ahead.
Well, I just want to make sure, high intensity versus high stress, right? Like, and making sure to clarify that point is, and how are you factoring that in, right? Because a high stress might be a 20-mile run as hard as you possibly can go, and
Yeah,
like that's brutal. But like high stress could also be really freaking heavy that day. So can you
correct.
frame me around that high stress in the context you mean?
Yeah. And so, one, it's knowing the individual.
Yep,
And again, I know that can be annoying to say, like,
it's
I got
not.
to know
Yeah.
the person, but like, you need to know, is it that endurance runner? It's like, okay, now we've got this officer who wants to take the long walk, and
Hmm.
he ran track in college. Cool. You know what type of base he's got compared to the other guy who's like, dude, I just want a bodybuilding, gets by on his strength. So now what is
Totally different.
stressful to them is all going to be relative to the individual. So we have to make sure that we're adjusting volumes accordingly. They still need to be able to do and go through the same door. They're still going to be judged against the same standards, but what
Hmm.
that path from where they're at now is going to look like very different. They might get more of X and Y. But yeah, to your point, I'm going to look much more along the lines of a tissue tolerance standpoint when it comes to the stressors. Is this something, because there's a very big difference between going, like, people that have rucked are going to know that there's a big difference between doing that on a dirt road or hard pack compared to cement. Or
Hmm.
there's a big difference between saying, yes, now what we're going to do for a ruck over the weekend is we're going to break ground. You're actually going to go out and do that across trees, across branches, off trail. These are, I mean, so they're entirely different things. And so, but understanding that where you start them at and what some high stressors are might be medium stressors by the end or the middle of their training. And so we'll look at it from the nervous system standpoint. We'll look at it from the tissue tolerance standpoint. So if they are running massive amounts of miles, or going through, yes, your big ruck. Let's say we built up to like higher teens. When
Yeah.
it comes to some of their distances, yes, that would be a bigger stress day. So what we might coincide that with is a bigger stress day from our lower body and training. And so, not the age old coaching answer of it depends, but it
Hmm.
depends on what's relative to them. It depends on where they're at in their training, but it's really on the nervous system side and the tissue tolerance side that'll really look at stressors.
I like that. The tissue tolerance piece is what I want to talk about, because obviously you've got the white stuff, you've got the red stuff, you've got the bone, right? And
Yep.
and I'm curious, kind of, and I'll pull a story maybe to kind of help frame us around this. There was a wide receiver, I think it was Marvin Harrison Sr. potentially, who was like, I started playing basketball barefoot on the concrete because I knew if my feet were tough enough to handle that shit, I could throw on cleats on the soft grass and go out there and like let it rip. So, how do you play with these, like footwear and like this tissue tolerance,
Yeah.
and how do we think about that matrix, because it's such an important one for operators. You're going to be on your feet doing stuff. This is always
Yep.
locomotive, and there's all these different, pieces of footwear you can wear. So I'm curious about like how you frame tissue tolerance around some of those aspects.
Yeah, it's again, I know I'm sure every UHP person anybody's ever worked with me is like, they're going to scream that Hunter's going to say it depends, but like it's meeting them like where they at. So in other words, if they're coming off injury, what
Hmm.
is now their training history that structure has? Like when I
Hmm.
look back at my athletic career or just as a coach, I had a bad foot injury when I was coaching at Wyoming. And the lessons
Hmm.
I learned out of that from the psychological and then the rehab out of it was huge. I wouldn't trade it for the world. At the time, it was brutal. However, what you then learn is, and you start to gauge on, what does it take to actually build the bone back up, build the tendon back up, not to just walk and pass the eval. So the orthopedic surgeon says you're good to go, but to be an athlete. So if now I've built up 27 years of training, all the running, all the moving, all the things to do that, and then that stops, and then I've removed all load, all stress for a year. And we see that within people, like when they come back to these return to run programs, and they're like, I'm going to go out for a mile run or a 2 mile run. And it's like, you haven't like run at all. And now you haven't run a meter. Now you're going to do a 1,600 meter run. So you did, to some extent, a 1,600% increase in weight. They walk away and they're like, I am so sore. I'm so beat up. And now I can't run anymore. Well, yeah, because look at what you did.
You dropped a
And
nuke.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. And so what we then need to do is, one, where are they at in training? So the first question I'll have with people, it doesn't matter if I'm working with an individual, it doesn't matter if I'm then working with a group. I want to know where you're at and what is our lowest hanging fruit to where we can just start to build that tolerance in, especially on the running, especially on the load. Anybody who's ever rucked initially, it's usually not their feet, their upper back, their shoulders. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just so beat up. Well, that tissue
Compressed,
hasn't
right?
been used
Yeah.
to it. It's not that it was heavy. It's not that you can't, but we need to, like the metaphorical callus, but also from a callus standpoint in regards to the tissue, we need to build. And so then we need to slowly drip those pieces in and allow adaptation to happen. And that's why,
Yeah.
like training somebody for selection, if they've been training, if they've built those calluses, and we don't have to do just a massive GPP or accumulation phase, now we can, like, yeah, you're ready to train for it. Otherwise, we need to get your body ready to handle it. We're not even getting an aerobic effect that we would truly want out of speeds you have to go, because your body can't handle the load or the speeds yet. It's not an aerobic function. It is now the tissue's ability to be able to, whether it's muscle, it's bone, it's ligament, move, handle those loads and stresses. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces that gets overlooked. And I think why injuries happen so much faster, because they can do the thing, but then they're doing the thing at a higher intensity or frequency in which their body wasn't ready for. And now that exposure, when they haven't built the base, runs into trouble.
That's really fascinating stuff. I think to use the rucking as an example, right? Let's just take someone who's bad at it, right? Like, my shoulders hurt, I can't breathe. Clearly someone who hasn't spent the miles under that yet. Um, when we're making a consideration for, because like you said, a lot of these guys come in and it's just they're able to survive a lot of shit.
Yep.
And it's not because their training was so good or they were so smart at that. It's just that they were tough. And so when you have someone, especially with something like rucking, right, where it is like, hey, it's this weird shit. It's these intercostal muscles. It's the lungs' ability to expand literally under like up to
Yep.
120 pounds of shit, right? Like how are you kind of training for something like that where it isn't necessarily something that, like, I don't know any books that have that element written about it, right? That's like something I only hear from coaches who've been in this space and experienced like coaching around that. Is it as simple as throwing on the ruck and making them do it at a rate that matches them where they're at, or is there like special shit that you can kind of throw on them for this kind of stuff?
Yes. Let's talk the special shit. No, I say that kind of jokingly, but it goes back to the piece of when people are like, how do I get faster? Awesome. How often are you running fast to begin with? Once a week? Cool. You're not running or doing the skill on a regular basis where you think like you even need to start training it. It's like, how do I get better at basketball? How do I get better at becoming a soldier? Do soldier shit. In other words, we need to at least get out and start doing the thing to begin with before we even have an idea of what needs to be built from an adaptation or a training standpoint. In other words, like we know that upper body strength has strong carryover to rucking. That doesn't mean that the strongest upper body guys in the world, if we take a gymnast who has pound for pound tremendous upper body strength, is going to get crushed under a ruck. Okay, so what's the skill? Well, they haven't rucked. There it is. So we
Yep.
need to go and start there. So and sometimes, I mean, the old, like, what is it, Occam's razor? In regards to the simplest answer is usually the right one.
Totally.
And so if you've got a short period of time in which somebody needs to be able to ruck, let's start rucking. And then let's look at what's missing. Why are you struggling with that ruck? Is it your frequency? Is it your aerobic capacity? Is it your strength? And then we will add that into and make it a part of it, not instead of. However, once somebody's really good at it, like now we can actually pull that in as far as like pull that back, excuse me, and then we can start working on some of the other things. I mean, if we want to talk like West Side, now let's find the weakness. Now let's do the variation of the thing
Mm-hmm.
that's going to bring up and why we're training in the first place.
And how do you
And
assess though, right? How do you assess what it is? Because if it's a tissue quality thing, is it like, hey, like my calves are always shot? Is it based on the subjective feedback they give you?
yeah,
Okay.
because that's to me, that's all that matters. And
Yeah.
I can tell them that we can look at the objective stuff and we do, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and even the research backs up the subjective piece is huge. It's why, like, even again, shout out to Bridge, it's why questionnaires are so darn powerful. And it's why
Mm-hmm.
somebody, like what one person said was a suffer fest. The person next to them is laughing their ass off, loving it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the mentality that goes into that is going to be like, yeah, my calves are shot. Okay, cool. Is that brutal and you need to stop? Or is that like, you know, it's part of it and you know it's going to pass? Or, but it comes down to like, what does their history look like? So then we
Yeah.
can actually start to see like, you haven't done enough reps for us to look at to really like see, you know, is this something that we need to address? In other words, if we're a week in or 2 weeks in and we've done some sort of proper progression, if we're seeing things that we haven't done before, then we can start to like to that point assess and be like, there's no reason why you should be so beat up right now based
Mm-hmm.
off what you're saying. But then understanding what words mean to them. In other words, yeah, I run every day. I do. When like you talk to people in the military, they're like, I have to get faster. I want to get faster. A field sport coach, like you hear that and you're like, we got to sprint, we got to get faster.
Mm-hmm.
What faster means in the military is now I need to get better at my 2 mile time. That's not speed. That's a road. So just making sure
Yep.
that one, the communication is always there to understand. And that's going to be your biggest assessment to understand, to then start peeling back. What have they been doing training wise? Then how do we actually start to properly program the progressions in?
I love that. That's really cool on that on those questionnaires and feedback loops, right? Because really that you're taking a dynamic system and addressing these various components, right? Kind of with a very specific dose, like you're talking about in that doctor example, and I really love that. I know a lot of people have had questions about assessment and how you guys are going about that. I also want to time check, make sure, are you good to go for like another
Yep.
15? Okay,
Yeah, I'm
cool.
good, man.
So thinking about, like what assessments are you guys using? And like let's just start there and kind of talk about what that looks like as it plays out over time.
Yeah, I mean, what we looked at is we did a variation from the aerobic side of the house at a modified Cooper test. So what we could look at was aerobic fitness from a 6 minute test. Now, if we wanted to get more specific to the individual, if they're going to selection, then we need to make sure that the test is what they're going to be asked to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're looking at a gross overview on the physical characteristics,
Yep.
one, I want to talk to the team sergeant from the standpoint of being able to look at, you know, like what matters to that team sergeant. And that's where like I talk to like our coaches, and you need to be able to understand the value proposition of what are the pains, what are the gains that I'm solving as a coach.
Mm.
And so how do I communicate that with the team sergeant? So what are the things that matter to them? And then making sure that so we're speaking the same language. What do they want to get better at? What do they feel they need to? What do I want to? Then I can build my assessments from there. And so do we need to get very general in regards to those assessments? Is it as simple as, is it an aerobic test? Is it an anaerobic test? So in other words, the 300-yard shuttle with multiple bouts of that was big for a long time within special operations. Is it
Mm.
looking at a lower body strength test? Is that the trap bar? In other words, how do we like minimize some of the technical proficiencies that might be needed for a deadlift? Some people could argue either way, but point being like, is that the test that we want to use? Do we want to look at pushing strength? Do we want to look at pulling strength? And then, okay, so here's our general physical capabilities. Now, what do we need to get into from a sport specific standpoint? So, I mean, thinking about it like the NFL combine, here's all the tests. We see vertical jump, we see the 40, we see the thing, and then they go into position specific drills that they're being assessed.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that I'm going to go the nth degree and I'm going to hand them a rubber gun and they're going to be running around. Like there's been tests where they tried that, and my hat's off to the people that do that, but I think now we're wasting a little bit. But it's why is it carrying over to the things that they know are successful for them when they're downrange? In other
Mm.
words, whether that's, you know, we were using, when I left, we started to use catapult. from the standpoint
Yep.
is we wanted to be able to look at what does your breathing rate look like, your heart rate, the accelerometer, what's the workload. In other words, like from the subjectivity standpoint, like how do we remove that? How do we make this objective? What does your training look like while you're home? How do we measure all that? And so then it's like, how do we get it on them? You know, when we're going to the range, when we're doing stress shoots, when we're doing physical events, stuff that is not in the gym, but stuff that they have, even if it's built into like tradition, and looking at from a standpoint, okay, you guys are going for a ruck today. Let's throw these on. Let's saddle up. Let's see what that looks like. And then we can at least, it's like, yes, every one of you was able to do it. But again, Billy in the back, Billy's at like 90% of his max heart rate. And he is just by will, like keeping up with the team because he will break before he sees them fall off.
Mm.
Meanwhile, the guy setting the pace is at 50%. And so then what we can do with some of that data is then we start programming based off heart rate max, percentage recoveries, and some of those pieces. So one, we set like our general characteristics within the gym. Then two, how do we then get into like the very specific stuff when it comes to what they feel is necessary, which also like from an empowerment piece, they're the experts on what they need to do. And the example would be like if they said that like every day I'm going to bang my head through the wall because that gets me mentally ready to go. You know what we're going to start with? One set of 8 of head bangs against the wall because that makes you ready to go. Because who the hell am I then to tell you that that assessment is not what's going to make you ready? So even if it's a placebo, but it's truly understanding. It's
Yeah.
understanding what it looks like in the gym from a physical, in the general, and then what does it look like when it goes to their work to be able to set them up for success.
It sounds like to hopefully, steer some of the answer towards, what the folks are asking, that you need to have a skill set as a coach
Yep.
that allows you to throw on something like a heart rate monitor and know exactly what you're seeing, to use something like Catapult and be able to get in that data and see what's going on and have that subjective filter with the individual in front of you. So it sounds like there were a lot of custom things you just kind of like, hey, well, I don't know, but we know that rucking is really hard for you, and so we're gonna put you under a ruck and we're gonna kind of like custom, build this thing that replicates that, essentially shitstorm that you feel,
Yep.
and we're gonna assess from there. So what are kind of those fundamental coaching skills and the data a coach needs to be able to assess, because that's what it sounds like the assessment falls back to. Am I right, wrong?
Yeah, to some extent. And the only reason I say to some extent is there's so much like in anybody in the community, like last 5+ years, everybody is so like they've got this massive drive to collect all the data. Just tell me what the hell you're doing with it. If you're not doing
Mm-hmm.
anything with it,
Okay,
then
man.
like who gives like congratulations, you're collecting it. That's not the intent.
No, yeah.
But and so yeah, so if you have those tools, that's great. But you don't have to have some like one. We were fortunate; we had a really great data guy. And he's a unicorn when we had him at group, so he could break down a lot of the stuff for me. Made my job easy.
Yeah.
However, like as a coach, we at least need to understand where people operate from a heart rate percentage. And
Mm-hmm.
even if that meant like back in the day, we're going to strap a heart rate monitor on you and I'm going to project that up onto the wall. And then we're going to be able to see where you're at. Okay, Susie is, you're actually working where below where we need to. Like, not that it's straight up orange theory, but
Mm-hmm.
like we want to see what's going on so we can at least learn.
Yeah.
And then from the education piece. So then when you say you're at a 10, we can see like, is a 10 a 10? And so that educational piece there. So when we're looking at the data, I'll take subjective, but like the big thing that I talk about with like RPE or subjectiveness is one is that individual trustworthy. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean from like a character standpoint. Do they have the experience to be able to define what a 10 is? In other
Yeah.
words, do they know what a 10 feels like? And that means as a coach that you need to go out and you need to put your face in the fan to some extent. Like you
Yeah.
need to touch the fire and you need to understand like this is one, it's going to build trust. Two, when you start doing and building out programming and training, you need to understand what you're about to ask people to do. And even if you've got some limitations, you at least need to try to feel what all these different is. But I'll
Right.
take it, dude. I'm a massive fan is just a litmus test. Scale of 1 to 10. Where are you at right now? 10 being like you can't take another step. One being like, dude, like I'm fresh and I'm ready to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Whatever
Really
that
working
is.
out. Yeah.
So start there. When it comes to your stuff, you don't need to get overly like specific. Nothing wrong with percentages and data information or whatever that is. However, don't get caught up in chasing all the cool sciencey, sexy gear.
Hmm.
If you're not having the conversation, just asking them where they're feeling or what they're feeling,
Yeah.
because that is going to be the bigger indicator. And they're the ones that are doing it as the athlete in the first place. And it's going to go back to forming that relationship, and it's going to help you understand and give a better ability to communicate. So then they're actually like, you know what? Today was a 9 or today was a 5, coach. Like, we got more in us if we need to push today. But none of that'll
Mm.
happen without the relationship.
Well, it's cool because it all ties back to kind of that, original question, which is like, when NATO called your name, it was like, what did you tell them? Right. And it seems like so much of the success of any programming with a special operator, and I would even extend that to any programming with anyone, is getting to know them on a very deep level. And kind of go, you can never like have someone make the leap themselves, but at least going to the edge with them and leaping together, it sounds like is a lot of the underlying biopsychosocial principle here, I guess, if we're gonna pin it on any scientific term. So I love that, man. I appreciate you sharing all that. Now I would love to get into the Q&A side of things, but is there anything else you kind of want to add, to what we've talked about today, or any takeaways you feel like people should make from this?
No, I mean, I'll always go back to, you have to be a human first coach. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was why, and it was the question that I asked, your point, why, when I was from the point of contact there in regards to Alden, why they reached out to me. They're like, you are viewed as a human first coach. You were able to cross bridges and everything else that others potentially struggled with within
Mm-hmm.
working with those in those communities. And so that's why that is so passionate to me, because that then opens up the door to, like, now let's go to work. Don't get it twisted. Just because I know that you're stressed out and I have these things going on does not mean that we are not going to get after it. And what we're going to do today is not going to be extremely challenging, and I'm going to hold you extremely accountable. But you've got to
Yeah.
get to know those individuals. So that's where I would go with that. And then on the training and the programming side, you have to be willing to dig in and go that layer deeper of truly what's possible to put together an organized plan
Mm.
for people. The laziness that I hear people talk about, that it is too hard or whatever it is, like, no, like, that's where, like the old school, like the old man in me, I'm like, no offense, like, figure it out. Your
Yeah.
job is to figure
Amen.
out what the plan that they need to. And if you're like, well, they come in this many times and they only have 20 minutes and they only have 50 minutes, they come in 1 day a week, then 6 days a week. Like, I don't give a shit. Your job is to program and to make them better. It is not to come to them with excuses and be like, you know what, your schedule is too different. I guess the lowest hanging fruit is just where we got to go. So that's going to be my biggest pushback with that.
I
So
love that. Yeah, yeah, I really do. I really do. Because I mean, even if I were to go frame this around a Gen Pop person, right, and apply this to a different demographic, they say all the same shit. They're stressed out. They're gonna come in every third or fourth day at a different time, and have a different set of whatever the fuck. And sometimes they're gonna drink, and their sleep's gonna be shit. And you have to be able to like go back down to the principal level and still know like what to apply and how to
yeah,
apply it over a period of time. There's just no excuse, right, to like just
yeah,
surrender and go belly up to
it's
that.
it is, and it doesn't mean that you're not empathetic. But then it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, there's a reason why. Like, one of my mantras is, you're not here to feel, and that doesn't mean from the emotional side. Be in tap with that. You need to understand, but if you need to understand what is the goal and what is the reason for my training in the first place. And if
Yeah.
all you're doing is making excuses, then we need to have the conversation around, is that goal even appropriate? No, it is. That's my dream. Well, everything you're doing, do your actions, do your goals, and those two
Yeah.
align. If they don't, then no offense, man. Let's or miss, let's reevaluate so you can actually move the needle, or else you're going to get to the end of this and you're going to feel like a failure because you set yourself up.
Hmm.
But you got to understand, like, wherever you're willing to go, there's going to be, to some extent, a price that you have to pay. And those expectations need to be in line with the investment, time, resources, energy, whatever it is. And if you don't want to invest, then don't get upset for the expectations that didn't happen.
I dig that. Yeah, I also really like the coaching frame of mind around that too, where there should be kind of no territory you're unwilling to go with the athlete. if they are aligning their life to it, you need
Yeah.
to be, willing to kind of get your hands dirty with it. I love that, man. Cool. Well, I want to get into kind of the Q&A. And so one of the questions is, what are some of the crucial aspects of training that you believe are often missing from operators fitness, even at the highest levels, as in areas of focus that you think need more attention, and how would you implement that?
Down
Sounds like a
regulation.
general overview of
Yeah,
that.
no,
Okay,
it's
down
great.
regulation. Yeah.
Yeah, down regulation. And what I mean by that is these are already individuals. And if you know the community well, they're probably drinking to fall asleep at night. They're caffeinating to wake up.
Yeah.
They struggle with sleep. And then they already have a high stress, high speed environment, and they thrive off of that. Like they have now trained themselves to be addicted to the chaos. It's why you
Hmm.
see guys fall asleep on the bird as they're going into a mission, like because that's where they're calm and they're being like they're getting that hit. And so like what we need to be able to do, and it's we go into the general pop standpoint and even like high executives in the business world, like you can't tell them not to operate at the intensity they need to. So what you
Yeah.
need to do is help them down regulate. How do I get you out of that sympathetic state, pull you into the parasympathetic? Because right now, what you think is like you're always switched on, then anybody says I was born ready, like gets under my skin. I'm like, dude, if you were born ready, like you're operating at probably like 60, 70% of your capability. How do we get you to like, when it's time to shut off, let's get you to shut off?
Hmm.
And why being able to then build the trust in the relationship so you can help to understand like today we are going to do a more static stretching, a yoga, call it broga, and we're going to come in and we're going to do breath work.
They love Broga. Yeah.
Dude, and it blew up. It turned into a joke. And then all of a sudden, more and more guys were showing up for broga in our like down regulation sessions.
Yeah.
And like from anything like, dude, I come home and I don't want to throw my kids across the room. I don't want to explode. Or I'm like, then that is a win.
That's a huge,
Because
maybe the
we
biggest win.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, and we have to understand that these are such skilled, quote unquote, operators. Yes, they're athletes, but what goes on in their skill set that they have is the more we can keep them intact in regards to being able to mentally be able to withstand, the physical will follow if we put them in the right tools. So
Mm.
being able to help them down regulate, because a lot of it, they're like, I'm not here for that woo woo. And the thing is, fortunately, we're seeing that pendulum start to swing compared to what we saw 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so,
Love
anyways,
that.
people are willing to lean into a little more of the hippy dippy, the woo woo, which we know is not, and why the
Yeah.
power in the breath, why being able to go into that parasympathetic. So that way, when they do flip the switch, that light is all the brighter compared to just constantly being on.
Yeah. No, I love that. And the concept of flipping the switch and turning the dial down and all those things is extremely critical to that group. Cause a lot of them, like, you know, it's not like their childhoods were like super happy and awesome for a lot of these guys. And like they, like a lot of this doesn't come from the best place.
Yeah.
Their ability to do these things because they've had to endure shit before. Like it's not like you show up, put your boots on the line, and it's like all of a sudden I'm ready to tolerate shit. That's a skill they've developed, often not through the kindest, most gentle environments. So it's good to hear that is they're getting that at stages when they're in like the service and learning that in the service, because I think that's such a massive issue
Yeah.
in the community. So I'm really glad to hear that. And it ties well into the next question, which is, at which stage of training do we want to look at breath work? Understanding HRV and stress response plays a role in improvement. How much of an impact does that have on improving performance?
I mean, from day one. I mean, to some extent, tying in with that, like if you have the ability to actually do cool down sessions, help from an educational standpoint, like one, breath work's going to be big. Like two, from an HRV standpoint, I think people need to understand what it is, whether that's like shout out to Whoop as far as using that or other
Mm-hmm.
devices that are out there,
Yeah.
learning true what their flexibility is when it comes to their ability to adapt and making sure that they're looking at trends and not using as it an excuse. In other words, if you use Whoop, and we were talking about it today, wake up and it says I'm in the red. Well, it doesn't mean you can't do hard things, or a lot of it just means it's going to take more energy to recover from. And is it a one-off, or are we seeing trends time and time and time and time again? But not getting caught up. And it's not that breath work isn't great. It's not that HRVs aren't great. But I also know people like, and I call it recovery porn, that they're like, dude, my recovery game's on point. I'm cold plunging in the morning. I'm sauning at the night. I got my Whoop device on. I got this. I'm like, brother, what are you recovering from? Well, I'm getting my walks and I get the sunshine on my face for 10 minutes. And I'm like, awesome. We're not training hard enough now.
Yeah.
Now, like, we need to look at some of those pieces. And it's not that those, like, it's not one or the other.
Well, it's
But
entropy, right? That concept we talked about earlier. It's like if you're
yeah,
leaking
it's
shit.
just making sure that we're still stressing. This is an individual that has to deal with stress, and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we are stressing them to the need that we get to. And then we can talk about the importance of HRV. But it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter. It doesn't mean that we can't introduce breath work from day one. It's just helping establish that to make sure that they're actually trained in the first place.
Dig that. And in the vein of stress, I like the way these questions were relayed because they kind of tie all into one
Yeah, it's
another.
beautiful.
The 3 a day, right? You mentioned that, and like, kind of at least from my point of view, and tell me if I'm wrong, but like in the tactical environment, right? Especially on a deployment, who knows what today is going to bring? It might be
Correct.
24 hours straight of shit. And like, I mean, a ruck on your back or like, 50 pounds of armor and you are like moving the entire day. That is like, as blue collar as it could possibly get. Right. So you brought up the concept of the 3 a day and kind of how you lay that out and
Hmm.
what that looks like in training. So can you dive a little more into that? And then I think that let's have that be the last one for today.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one, you obviously don't go from like 1 a day to 3 a day.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
start off and you look at like, what is our benefit of it? And so what we're probably looking at is if a training session is long enough or it gets to a point to where we just feel there's probably too much volume of work in
Hmm.
that one session. And if there is, now we're going to split it into two. And so we'll start off with like, okay, let's build up to movement of 6 days a week. Now from there, let's
Hmm.
start dropping into one. So now we've got 6+1, and then we're staggering that out. So it's now, 6+1 across the board, or whatever our
Yeah.
high low days are. Now, once we've gotten to that point, now we're moving to a third. And it's usually a volume of work that we see much more on the aerobic side, whether it's running, rucking, or just aerobic capacity.
Right. Those things, it's not one rep maxing, right?
No,
Like
it's
it's
not.
going to be something in that vein of cardio, most
Correct.
likely.
And at that point in the training, what we've probably done is pulling their heavy work back to like 2 days a week. And now everything else is much more along the lines of movement. And one of those sessions might just be whether it's some sled work with minimal eccentric work, but it's just straight up like concentric, minimize soreness, minimize some of the tissue, but we're getting that heart rate up. It
Hmm.
might just be like, I don't care what you do today, but we need 5 total hours of aerobic or heart rate above 65%. And if I've got a Whoop, I've got a device or whatever it is, I can look and see like, quote unquote, did we stay in zone 2 or whatever we want to call it, 65 to 75%? To
Hmm.
at least 5 hours a day. Cool. We need to get that now up to like, we want to do that. So you can start looking at time in which we're getting in our zone 2 work or cardiac output. Zone 2 just bothers me. It's why I always say cardiac. But anyways,
Yeah.
but we've seen like on the research shows, we have not seen the upper threshold where too much is a bad thing. In other words,
Wow.
they've looked at speed skaters from Denmark that were doing 35, 36 hours over 5 training days. And if you do the math on that, we're
Jesus.
talking 7+ hours a day. And what they still saw was benefit from it. It was a combination of cross training, running, biking, swimming, rock climbing, playing, sport, game, but they were getting their heart rate up and moving. So what we
That's
need,
wild.
we learned from that is if now you're going to be going out and operating, the best training session cannot happen in 75 to 90 minutes to equate for the capacity needed to operate for a day or hour upon hour on end. I don't care
Exactly.
how dialed it is.
Yeah, yeah. No matter what you hear in, like the air conditioned gym part of this stuff, like,
Yeah,
like that's not what's fucking happening out there.
correct.
So
And
we
we
need
can
to
have
train
the
like Denmark
biggest,
speed skaters, is what you're telling me.
to some
More of the
extent. I mean, one,
better.
one, they look amazing in their speed suits, so I'm not mad at
Always.
that.
The
Like,
operators would love that.
dude, I'd love to walk around with quads like that.
Yeah,
However,
right.
but I say that from the standpoint as far as like so many of us. I mean, there was a quote by Lou Cartel as far as like he taught
Hmm.
Carell, in which he talked about like winners are worried about not doing enough, and then the losers are worried about trying to basically, are they doing enough in the first place? And so, other words, like
Totally.
find the person that's willing to do more. And if they're like, I think this is too much, then I'm like, you know what, this might not be for you.
Hmm.
And I say
Which
that
is
with all the love in
totally
my heart.
acceptable. Yeah.
But you need to understand that if you're not willing to go out and do something, because everybody I've talked to has gone through a selection or some sort of school or process you are going to be faced with at least one, if not multiple moments in which your why, your purpose is going to come to a question. And you're going to have to figure out and decide, why the hell am I doing this in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do not have that strong why, if you are not willing to do the work, then it is not going to go your way. And if you are already in your training looking to do less, now we're going to have a conversation around the fact that, you know what, this night might not be the best thing for you. I would
Yeah.
rather be the one, make me be the asshole as a coach, to
Yep.
where I find out that you're doing more behind the scenes. And that was common. And now I need
I
to help
bet.
them understand, like, brother, like, I got you. Trust me on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
However, give me that person every day of the week compared to the one who I come to find out is bullshitting and not logging their training, or because they're skipping out on it.
Easier to scale back than scale up, I've always found with
Yep.
athletes. And yeah, usually that where that happens is if they're truly like spiritually aligned with what they're doing. And if that's not the case, they're not going to do it, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to be there. So okay, I love that, man. Tell us a little bit, the group, about what you're doing at UHP and kind of what's going on in the future there, because I think it's important to now frame around, what's
Yeah.
your day to day looking like.
Beautiful, man. Other than the fact that we had a power outage, because we have all sorts of
Of
amazing
course.
growth and construction going on today. But so UHP it's really a transition organization. Right
Mhm.
now, we're within the health and science field of how are we take when people leave the military, when they're
Mhm.
transitioning out, and we're looking at, servant leaders, people that
Yep.
have like poured themselves into so much of our identity. And even athletes can relate to this. One day, you have been a football player, a basketball player, whatever, and you've taken that uniform off, and now part of that identity is no longer like who you are. And so when we're working within the military and veterans, how do we help them understand that who they are is like one of our nation's greatest assets? Your
Mhm.
skills, your ability to like pour into others and usually put others first. Like you talked about, there's a lot of people that some of their backgrounds are like, you know what, it's easier for me to help take care of others than, to fill their cup than fill mine first. And so what we're doing is making sure that the people that have, raised their right hand, how do we take care of them and establishing amazing careers when they leave the military? And so
Yeah.
we're doing that through a number of courses. So one, becoming a strength and conditioning coach. So we've got a certified personal training course. The other course that we currently have the ground is our integrative health coaching course. We're the only all in-person integrative health coaching course in the world. And those that are not familiar with integrative health coaching, it's a board certified profession. And what you do is you focus on behavior change and you focus on what matters to people, not what's the matter with them. And so because of that, you become a go-between. In other words, whether that's working with doctors, nutritionists, whatever it is, how do you then help the behavior of somebody that needs to change and understanding what matters to them? And so that is a profession that is massively on the rise. And then we're going to be
Love
launching
that.
our nutrition course, which is going to be amazing. It's going to be the first only farm to table. Like our students are going to come in. How do you grow the crops? How do you prepare the crops? How do you then program? And then how do you actually coach and run a business around it? And so we've got we're at 800 acres now. We're in Northwest Arkansas, and all of our
Gorgeous.
course, we're in the foothills of the Ozarks. So like
Hmm.
my view right now is literally looking out of like our dining facility and over the river. Like there's worse places to be.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but what it is everything is very practical. Everything is immersive. From the standpoint is like that's great, and there's no knock against certifications that require just book stuff from the information. However, that doesn't mean that you can coach. And so we are very much, how do you learn the art of coaching? We're going
Mm.
to get into the business of coaching, the psychology of it, to the communication piece, the theory and the application. So it is practical coaching reps that become more and more complex. How do you build a business? How do you understand marketing? How do you understand the communication piece? How do you then understand how to program? Like we've got, 12, 10 modules on programming alone.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of pieces that go into it. So point being, like, we are, and my goal is with UHP, and I know everybody else on our team is as well, is if I want to learn how to coach, I want to be a human first coach. I want to actually connect and make a difference. Then I go to UHP. And
Fucking
so
badass. Yeah.
yeah, so we've got GI Bill approval, and because of that, one of our goals from our founder in regards to Matt Hesse, one of our like missions is the fact that we do not want to take a dollar out of a veteran's pocket. So it's not that they obviously didn't earn their GI Bill, but we're not, taking money from them, so to speak. Yes, they earn that and that is their money. However, like it's not something we want people paying for.
Yeah, of
So we've
course.
got GI Bill approval. It has been an amazing experience. And so I never thought I would leave group. And then when Matt and I met, and he's like, here's what we're trying to do. We are
Yeah,
literally going to, like, one, how do you share something I love, strength and conditioning, human performance, with a population that is the military and the tactical environment that I love and care about so much,
of course.
in a profession that has given me my life. And so I
Hmm.
get to coach and share strength and conditioning with the military community to help them become the profession that I love. Yeah, I'm good with that. Let's go to work.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, it is badass what you guys are able to do. And I think it solves such a tough time for any service member, right? That transition period, it's so different, coming back into civilian life after going through those things. And I love what you guys are doing, and I especially love that, I think you posted it to your story actually this morning, but just like the results you're getting with the community too. And what was it, like 94, 97% are
Yeah, when
getting jobs
it's
after? Like, talk to me about that, because that's like, I've never fucking seen that anywhere in the strength and conditioning field, period. I've
yep.
never seen that under any other like organization that exists. Like, you're doing better than like colleges are doing right now, man, by like a fucking mile. So what's the sauce
Yeah.
there?
So I mean, one, it's built kind of off like the military framework in regards to opposed to people going to, and there's nothing wrong with 2 and 4 year degrees and all that it is.
Not
Do
at
not get
all.
me wrong.
Yeah.
However, if I look at all the courses that I did during my grad school, the work, like no offense to mammalian, advanced mammalian physiology two, what I use on that on a regular basis
Yeah.
over that entire semester. But what we're doing is from the military tempo, as far as now you are going to learn, you're going to deploy, and now you're going to apply it. And so what we want to do is it is going to rapidly upskill. How do we hack? How do we systemize? How do we do all of these things? But from some of the partnerships that we've had, in seeing that where our students are going and what they are doing, we've helped people get into the personal training community in regards to
Mm-hmm.
some of the businesses that we're aligning ourselves with
Mm-hmm.
that are becoming pipelines. We've had organizations that are coming in and looking at from like a holistic model when it comes to training, like we are trying to do what you are doing, that we are now pipelining to that. We've helped people that have gone into the special operations community and getting jobs there, that have gone into the big army, just across all
Yep.
branches.
Yep.
We've had a guy last 2 weeks ago finish up an internship down at a D1 school in Texas. Like
Nice.
we're trying
You're all
to
over, man.
branch. We're trying to, and my intent is that like coaching is coaching within this space. And how do we have the skills that do it? But yeah, to the point, from a graduation rate when it comes to certifications, from a job placement standpoint, we want to make sure that it's not all fluff. When we look at the data, when we look at the questionnaires and the stuff that we're doing, we know it works. And that's
Yeah.
why like I can get so behind all of this in
Mm-hmm.
regards to like watching the transformation of somebody who didn't even view themselves as a coach 19 days later, not only doing that, but then like going out, hitting the ground running. And like, dude, I've got like, we've had people come back like, dude, I've got double-digit clients within weeks and I'm now doing X, Y, and Z. Like, it's, yeah, it's all they're
That's
doing is like, how do we set people up for success? And these are
yeah.
individuals that had so many of these skills already. And
Yeah.
so, how do we hold that mirror up to be like, yeah, this is you, this is who you are. Here's our specific skill sets. Now let's get to work.
I love that. And I mean, like you're saying, you're bringing people who have never coached a day in their life, and 3 weeks later are like launching successful coaching
Yeah,
businesses. Like, that's badass, man. Like,
it is.
I mean, I think it also truly like speaks to, your ability to boil down, what is integral for you to learn, and what, like you said, what is that fluff. So that's just not, no one else is doing that, man. So, really
Yep.
want to commend you and thank you and express gratitude on behalf of myself, Bridge, the whole community, in here. And just, dude, this is like badass stuff, and we're all very grateful, that you took the time today.
Yep. No, it's trust me, to be able to talk training and all of that stuff. Like it's been a pleasure to be
Worst ways to
on
spend
here.
time, right? This is
Dude,
my
it's
favorite
great
part of my
despite the
job.
power
So
outage. So I appreciate everybody that stuck around.
yeah,
Fully acknowledge that. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, brother. I appreciate you and the time.
excellent. Well, on that note, we'll wrap it up. Everyone who was here today, thank you so much. Always appreciate it. Yeah, we'll keep you in the loop with some follow up stuff. Hunter has an awesome special operations special-ish operations program that he
Yeah,
made.
baby.
That'll be available to you in a few days' time. So we're stoked about it, and thank you to this community, man.
Yep. Thanks,
Cool.
guys. Appreciate you
All right,
tuning in.
later, y'all. See ya.